This is Don Drysdale. To be a champion athlete, you've got to have talent, luck, and skill, but most important of all, you've got to have determination. Today, I'll show you how that same determination saved the life of one of America's finest athletes. This program is a public service presentation of this station and your local Army recruiter. If you're a young man or woman who's determined to do something for yourself, check out the great training and careers you can get in today's bicentennial Army. Now, today's story. It's about an athlete who grew up in Columbus, Ohio. His father was a truck driver, and when this star was still a boy, he was as average as apple pie. But he remembers an event that happened when he was only 7 or 8 that changed his life forever. It took place in a hot August afternoon. The boy, well, we'll call him James, was walking home from school. He stopped for a traffic signal and caught up with 3 boys who were a couple of years older than he was. They talked, and the older boys began to tease him about his bag of school books. "What have you got in there?" they asked. Well, he said, "Just my school stuff," and tried to walk away. Instead, the older boys grabbed one of his books and began a game of keep-away. James was frightened. When he tried to get his book back, they began pushing him around and saying, "Well, if you want your book back, you're going to have to fight for it." Well, he was no match for the bigger kids, so James ran home with tears in his eyes. When he got there, he told his story to his father and asked him to go back with him and get the book. His father refused. "I'm not going back there with you," his father said. "You got yourself into trouble. Now get yourself out. You go back there and get that book yourself. Fight them if you have to, even lose if you have to. But you go back there and face him." So, blinking back tears, James went right back up the street. He did get in a fight with the other boys, who were pretty surprised to see him return. But he won and got his school book back. He never forgot that lesson, and he never gave up and ran away again. And it's a good thing he didn't, because a few years later, that same determination saved his life. And I'll tell you about that in just a moment after this word from today's Army. It takes more than one person to make a winner. When I was pitching baseball, I knew there were a lot of people on and off the field backing me up. Well, it's the same in the combat arms of today's Army. Armor, infantry, artillery, tough young men working together, overcoming challenge to accomplish the mission. Go with the first team and join the people who've joined the Army. Now back to our story. It's about an athlete named James who learned a dramatic lesson about never giving up. And that lesson saved his life in 1971. It was January 30th when he and 15 other men jumped into snowmobiles and took off for a 4-day run around Yellowstone National Park. There were deep drifts in the mountains, and it was an adventure they all looked forward to. That night, a blizzard blew in with winds up to 100 miles an hour. The men were forced to abandon their snowmobiles and try to reach help. For hours, they struggled through frozen drifts, and the icy winds whipped at them. They walked for 14 hours, clearing a path for themselves through the snow. They were so exhausted that it was hopeless to go on. No one had the strength to fight the battle. They knew if they lay down in the snow, well, they were dead. But battling the blizzard was impossible, and James remembered his father's words. "You got yourself into trouble, now get yourself out." He said, "We can do it." And he kept trying. Finally, they found a bridge that gave them some shelter from the storm. To start a fire, James emptied his wallet. It was the only dry paper around. As the little blaze of 10s and 20s crackled to life, the men smiled. Soon the kindling caught on, and they were crowded around the warmth of the life-giving fire. Well, one of them had died in the storm. The next day, a snowmobile found them, and they were rescued. Only one thing had kept James alive, and that was determination. Well, that man is Jim Marshall, one of the greatest defensive ends ever to play in the NFL. And this is Don Drysdale. Today's Army has determination, too. They're determined to teach you a skill with a future. So join the people who've joined the Army. Until next time, so long, everyone. This is Don Drysdale. Many times I've said that you've got to believe in yourself if you're going to succeed. It's true in all walks of life, including sports. The most important aspect of winning is the development of a positive mental outlook. But in sports, there's more than just believing in yourself. You see, someone else has to believe in you, too. And today, I'll tell you about some well-justified belief. This program is brought to you as a public service of this radio station on behalf of your local Army recruiter. Today's Army will teach you highly technical skills like maintenance or repair. Find out about Army training soon. Now, today's story. It's about believing in yourself and believing in other people. In 1945, the Second World War was ending. At the Great Lakes Naval Station, the coach was Paul Brown, later the coach of the Cleveland Browns. Brown had his eye on a great athlete from Tulane, William Dub Jones. About a year later, Jones was mustered out of the Navy and did get a job playing football for the Miami Seahawks of the All-Atlantic Conference. He didn't impress anyone very much with a lackluster season as defensive halfback, and Jones was traded to another forgotten team, the Brooklyn Dodgers. He tried harder with the Dodgers, but was even worse. Dejected and resigned, Jones decided to retire from football. You see, he'd given up on himself, but luckily for him and for American football fans, Paul Brown hadn't given up. He traded, and Dub Jones became a Cleveland Brown. What happened next was one of the greatest turnarounds in sports history. I'll tell you about it in just a moment. First, here's good news from today's Army. You know, it takes a lot of things working together to make a champion. Dedication, natural ability, intense training. Well, today's Army offers you the training you want, guaranteed before you enlist. Put this with your dedication and talent and come out a winner in the race of life. See your Army representative and join the people who've joined the Army. Now back to our story. It's about a man who believed. That man was Paul Brown. And the man he believed in, William Dub Jones. Well, the newspapers had a field day with the news. The headline in one sports column said, "Football's worst trade," describing the move to bring Jones to the team. Still, Brown thought he knew what he was doing. He thought that with experience and good coaching, he could mold Jones into one of the finest defensive backs to ever play football, but he was wrong. Jones wasn't made to be an outstanding defensive back at all. But he wasn't bad on offense, and soon Brown converted him to second-string fullback. And by 1951, the job belonged to Dub Jones. The Browns were a great team. They were on their way to their second division title, but the big game for them was the November 25th meeting with the Chicago Bears. And in the first quarter of the game, it looked like a standoff. In that first frame alone, each team was penalized over a half-dozen times, and players were limping off the field in pairs. It was a real meat grinder, and there was no score. Then in the second period, Jones crashed to the line for the first touchdown, and Cleveland jumped into the lead. A few minutes later, he scored again on a 34-yard pass from Otto Graham. They only gave Jones the ball 5 more times in that game, and he scored on 3 of them. His 5 touchdowns tied him for the NFL record established by Ernie Nevers in 1929. With 5 minutes still left in the game, Paul Brown just wanted to hold on to the ball and let the clock run out. But Otto Graham had other ideas. Brown sent in a running play, but Graham called one of his own. The Browns had the ball on the Bears' 43-yard line. Jones shot straight down the field, and the quarterback rifled a pass to him. Jones caught it at the 5-yard line and raced in for his 6th touchdown. Jones had set a new record for touchdowns in one game. And this legendary running back, Dub Jones, owed it all to a man who still believed in him after he had given up. That man was Paul Brown. This is Don Drysdale. If you're looking for a lifelong career in an interesting job, well, don't you give up either. Join the people who've joined the Army. Until next time, so long, everyone. This is Don Drysdale. Memories play tricks on you. That goes in any field, but it's especially true in sports. Somehow, the big plays get even bigger, and the average plays are forgotten. Today, I'll tell you about a basketball star who made one shot that overshadowed his entire career. This program is brought to you as a public service to this station on behalf of your local Army recruiter. Today's Army offers you the chance to live in Europe, and they'll guarantee it in writing before you enlist. See your local Army representative for details. Now, today's story. It's about a great basketball player for the Rhode Island Rams, Ernie Caverly. On March 15, 1946, Ernie made his way into basketball records. Not because he was an outstanding player and the team leader, but because of one shot. On that particular night, the Rams were playing Bowling Green in the National Invitational Tournament at Madison Square Garden. And the 20,000 fans in the Garden saw a fabulous game. The lead changed hands 12 times. Bowling Green was big and controlled the backboards. The Rhode Island State squad was short. The tallest starter they had was only a little over 6 feet. But they were very fast and punished the taller squad with continuous running and fast breaks. Each team would lead for a little while, and then the other. The game was tied 20 times. With 1 minute left to go, Caverly's Rams were trailing 72-70. Ernie took the pass, putting the ball into play, and broke down the sidelines. He worked in and out, faked his way under the Bowling Green basket and scored to tie the game. The crowd in Madison Square Garden was on its feet. The little center from Rhode Island was taking the game right to the big men. But Bowling Green wasn't done for the night either. One of their tall forwards worked his way down court and dropped the ball in to again take the lead 74-72 with only 10 seconds left. The situation seemed hopeless. Only a miracle could save the Rams, and I'll tell you about Ernie Caverly's miracle in just a moment, after this good news from today's Army. During World War II, many Europeans were surprised to see combat-hardened American troops taking time out to play a game of baseball. Well, it's much the same today. American soldiers from Texas to Thailand still take time out from their jobs to participate in athletics. Today's Army knows you have to be fit mentally and physically to meet the challenges of a modern world. Train hard, play hard. See your Army representative and join the people who've joined the Army. Now back to our story. It's about Ernie Caverly and his Rhode Island State Rams of 1946. They were playing Bowling Green of Ohio in the National Invitational in Madison Square Garden. With 10 seconds left in the game, Bowling Green led 74-72. To tie it, the Rams would have to put the ball in under their own basket and move it a full court length against men that were a foot taller than they were. The little Rams were clearly the underdog favorites, but victory seemed impossible. As the crowd stood up for the final 10 seconds of the game, it grew deathly quiet. Everyone was holding their breath to see if Rhode Island could catch up. Maybe someone would foul. Maybe a miracle would happen. Well, a miracle did happen. As each team jockeyed for position, Ernie Caverly broke away from the defenders and raced for his own basket. It seemed even sillier than the opening tip-off, which matched him with a 7-foot giant. But the incoming pass went directly to Ernie. He took it at the top of the key, turned, and shot. He was 10 feet inside his own half of the court, 55 feet from the basket. The ball arched high in the air as it soared over the defenders' heads. It slammed into the backboard at the far end of the court, bounced down toward the basket, and rattled through as the buzzer sounded. Caverly had tied the game with one of the most amazing shots in basketball history. The garden went crazy. Well, people were yelling, screaming, jumping, and trying to climb down on the floor to the court. The little guy had performed a miracle. That shot broke the spirit of Bowling Green, and Rhode Island went on to win in overtime, 82-79. Ernie Caverly had a great collegiate basketball career. He scored over 1,868 points in his 4 years at Rhode Island State, but the one basket that will always be remembered is the 155-foot desperation shot that only tied the game. This is Don Drysdale, and one thing you should always remember is that there's a job for you in today's Army. Join the people who've joined the Army. Till next time, so long, everyone. This is Don Drysdale. One of the greatest things in sports is turning defeat into victory. Well, I'll tell you about a terrible tragedy that turned into inspiration. This program is brought to you by this station as a public service on behalf of your local Army representative. Today's Army gives you a chance to serve yourself and your country. It's as simple as ABC if you go Army bicentennial. Now today's program. In 1945, World War II ended. Much of Europe was a broken mass of rubble. People were miserable. Their countries were in ruins. Italy was especially bad off. They had been treated badly by their German allies and then were overrun by the Allies. The people needed something to pick up their spirits, and that pick-me-up came from sports, specifically soccer. The whole country went soccer crazy. Stars of local teams were instant heroes. Championship teams were showered with gifts, publicity, and adoration. There's never been another sports craze like it in the world, and during the late 40s, being a soccer player was better than being a movie star or a millionaire. Every city poured their hearts into a chance to win the crown, but the perennial champs always came from Turin. They had a great coach and a great school program, and they believed in themselves. Year after year, Turin was the team to beat, something that seldom happened. As national champions, Turin toured all over Europe playing outstanding teams from other countries. They usually won, and their victories made all of Italy proud of their country and helped restore some of their lost national pride. You can imagine what it was like when they lost their entire team. And I'll tell you about that in just a moment. First, here's something from today's Army. You know, it takes a lot of things working together to make a champion. Dedication, natural ability, intense training. Well, today's Army offers you that training you want, guaranteed before you enlist. Put this with your dedication and talent, and come out a winner in the race of life. See your Army representative and join the people who've joined the Army. Now back to our story. It's about the soccer team from Turin. In 1949, they were Italy's national champions, and a war-torn country was regaining some of its pride as their team defeated one European opponent after another. Turin looked unbeatable. Then, one winter's day, they traveled to Portugal to meet the national champions of that country. The Portuguese were crafty and fast. The game was lightning fast as both teams ran each other past the point of endurance. The score was tied and then tied again. Finally, the Italians won a hard-fought game 4-3. They climbed on the plane to return home to a hero's reception. As the door on the DC-3 closed behind them, they waved to their Portuguese host and took off. It was the last time they were to be seen alive. As the plane soared into the clouds, the pilot had no way of knowing that a huge storm was whipping south out of the Swiss Alps and into the Mediterranean. Their small plane was whipped around in high winds and blinding rain. They lost altitude and tried to find a place to land, but they didn't have a chance. The wind finally slammed the plane into the sea, and everyone aboard was killed. It was the worst disaster in sports history. Never before had so many famous championship athletes been killed at once. The bodies were recovered and taken to Italy. Hundreds of thousands of mourners met the coffins as they arrived. As the cortege returned the bodies to Turin, the highways were jammed with onlookers. Everyone wore black armbands. Flowers covered the streets. It was a national tragedy. Men cried openly. When the coffins arrived in Turin, people from all over Italy began arriving to pay their last respects, and over 3 million people filed by the coffins in those last few days. The national government built a shrine in memory of that team, a huge archway with a statue of a soccer star. Well, that shrine still stands today as an inspiration to all athletes and as a reminder of what one sport can do for a country's morale. This is Don Drysdale, and your morale will be great if you join the Army team. Learn a skill with a great future in or out of the service when you join the people who've joined the Army. Till next time, so long, everyone. This is Don Drysdale. Many great athletes are remembered for the great battles they have won, sometimes against impossible odds. But the greatest honor any sports figure can receive is to be remembered for a loss, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. This program is brought to you as a public service of this station on behalf of your local Army representative. Today's Army will teach you a specialty that can provide you with an interesting future. See your nearby Army recruiter soon and find out what today's Army can offer you. Now, today's story. I said that being remembered for a loss can be a great honor. Well, it can be an honor if your career record only had one loss, and all the rest were victories. Of course, not many athletes can boast of a record like that. In fact, I don't know of any men or women that can do that. But there is one superstar, a horse. And it's a horse you've probably heard of. The greatest racehorse that ever lived, Man o' War. He ran 21 races in 3 years. He won every single one of them except one. In fact, in 1 year, he won all 11 races that he was entered in. He was great. And even today, no one will argue with the fact that Man o' War was unbeatable. The greatest of the thoroughbreds. Big Red, they called him, and he was an awe-inspiring animal. There was never any question in anyone's mind about whether he could win. He had winner written all over him from the day he was born. It was only a question of how much and how often he'd win. By the time Man o' War was full grown, he could go 28 feet in a single stride. His speed, strength, and determination made him a frightening opponent. Winners never made a lot of money betting on Man o' War. They got odds like 11-20 or 9-11, or in one race, 1-100. In that race, you had to bet $100 to win one. And you know, in that race, a well-known gambler put down a bet of $100,000 just to win $1,000. Now, that's how sure people were that Big Red would not lose. But he did lose one time, and that's what I'll tell you about in just a moment. First, here's some important news from today's Army. It takes more than one person to make a winner. When I was pitching baseball, I knew there were a lot of people on and off the field backing me up. Well, it's the same in the combat arms of today's Army. Armor, infantry, artillery, tough young men working together overcoming a challenge to accomplish the mission. Go with the first team and join the people who've joined the Army. Now back to our story. It's about the greatest racehorse who ever lived, Man o' War, and the only time he ever lost. I never had that kind of luck with any of the horses that I own, believe me. It was August 13th, 1919, the Sanford Memorial Stakes at Saratoga, New York. Man o' War was the big favorite at 11-20. The jockey was the best rider in the country. That was Johnny Leftus. A lot of people lost money that day because Man o' War looked like a cinch. He had won the first 6 races of the season, and this one looked like a surefire 7th. There was only one other horse that could rival Man o' War, a fast-starting 2-year-old named Golden Bruin. As the horses entered the starting gate, Man o' War was much calmer than you would expect from a highly competitive racing machine. Most racehorses are skittish and excited before a race. Man o' War seemed almost at ease as they stood waiting for the starter's bell. And then they were off. Maybe Man o' War was a little too much at ease. He was caught flat-footed at the post as the other horses jumped to early leads. Golden Broom led the way. At the first turn, Man o' War was still 7 lengths behind the pack. As they thundered down the straightaway on the far side of the field, Man o' War was still last and boxed in. As they came around the far turn, Big Red pulled to the outside. Then, as his long legs found room to stretch out, he began passing horses. He was 6th, 5th, 4th, now 3rd, and right behind Golden Broom as they reached the stretch. Then he pulled into 2nd place, and as the finish line rushed toward him, Man o' War began inching past the leading horse. But time ran out. As they crossed the finish line, Man o' War was still a nose behind. In another few yards, he would have pulled away, but that was too late. That slow start had cost the world's finest horse a victory, the only time he didn't win. And the horse he lost to? Well, listen to this name. That horse's name was Upset. And this is Don Drysdale. And I'll be upset if you don't race right down to your Army recruiters and join the people who've joined the Army. Until next time, so long, everyone. This is Don Drysdale. I've played a lot of baseball in my day, and it's a great game, and I loved every minute of it. I can tell you from experience that it's tough being a pitcher, and not so many candidates make it to the top. But the good ones do, and today you'll hear about a fabulous pitcher who never won a big league game until he was 31 years old. This program is brought to you as a public service of the station on behalf of your local Army representative. Today's Army will teach you career skills that you can profit from for a lifetime. Now, today's story. It's about a great pitcher for the Brooklyn Dodgers named Dazzy Vance. This man's story should be an inspiration to every young athlete, no matter what sport they're in. It's proof that if you're patient and believe in yourself, well, you can make it. Dazzy got into professional baseball in 1915. He pitched in 9 games for the New York Yankees, but never won a game. The following year, he was sent to the minors, and he stayed there for 5 wacky years. His arm hurt, and he never knew why, although he suspected that he might have injured it while boxing with his brother at their home in Red Cloud, Nebraska. Anyway, his arm hurt. But he was married, and he had a family to support, so he decided to stay in baseball. While he was pitching in Columbus, Ohio, he found that soaking his arm in a bucket of ice water between innings made him feel better. But after a few weeks, even that didn't help. So he went to the doctor. The doc told him, "I don't know what you've done to hurt yourself, but if you can keep it well for the next 4 or 5 years, well, you should be okay." Well, that's a long time for a pitcher to wait around for his arm to heal up. And if Vance knew any other way to make a living, he probably would have left baseball. Instead, he stayed. In 1917, he started the season in Toledo, Ohio, but he couldn't get the ball over the plate. The next thing he knew, he was in Memphis. His fastball was good, but by the 3rd inning, he was so tired that they'd pull him out of the game. He stayed in Memphis for another season, but it was obvious that he wasn't going anywhere. So he was traded to New Orleans, and all of a sudden he got better. His former teammates couldn't believe it was the same man when he whipped them only 2 weeks after being traded. But Dazzy Vance was only beginning his winning ways. And I'll tell you about this man's amazing success story in just a moment. First, here's some equally interesting news from today's Army. It takes more than one person to make a winner. When I was pitching baseball, I knew there were a lot of people on and off the field backing me up. Well, it's the same in the combat arms of today's Army. Armor, infantry, artillery. Tough young men working together overcoming a challenge to accomplish the mission. Go with the first team and join the people who've joined the Army. Now back to our story. Dazzy Vance had been in the minor leagues for 5 years. His arm hurt almost all the time, and he was a mediocre pitcher who tired fast and who had little consistency. But in 1920, he was traded to New Orleans, and overnight he began to pitch like a champion. In 1921, he won 21 games, and the Dodgers picked him up, although it wasn't what they originally had in mind. What they wanted was a catcher, but their scout was so impressed with Vance's fastball that they gambled and brought him up too. When he finally got to Brooklyn, he was 31 years old. Although his age was a secret, his sore arm was a baseball legend. He had drifted through 12 different teams in 12 different towns, but the Dodgers took a chance and bought him anyway. In his first year, he won 18 games and led the league in strikeouts. In his second year, he did the same thing, 18 wins, and he led the league in strikeouts. In his third year, he won 28 games, led the league in strikeouts, and was voted the most valuable player. He led the league in strikeouts 7 times, and that's something that no other pitcher has ever done. When he retired, he had won 197 games and struck out 2,045 batters, and he pitched until he was 44 years old. 20 years later, he was voted into baseball's Hall of Fame. And I say that's not bad for a guy that had a sore arm for 5 years and never won a game until he was 31 years old. This is Don Drysdale. You can be a winner at a much earlier age if you'll see your local Army recruiter soon. He's looking for young men and women who are interested in learning a career with a future. See him soon and join the people who've joined the Army. Till next time, so long, everyone. This is Don Drysdale. Bowling a perfect game is the dream of everyone that's ever picked up a bowling ball. Today, you'll hear about a guy that made a habit of it. This program is brought to you as a public service of this station on behalf of your local Army recruiter. Today's Army will teach you job skills that require technical training and offer you a lifetime career. Your nearby Army representative will be happy to tell you about Army training. Now, today's story. It's about a bowler named Eddie Lubanski. Eddie had a way with a bowling ball and was known as a dangerous opponent. On 3 separate occasions, Eddie had bowled a perfect game, 12 straight strikes, a score of 300. In 1958, he appeared on a local bowling show on a Miami TV station. The program offered $10,000 in cash to anyone that bowled a perfect game on their show. Well, Eddie was attracted by the offer, and he came in for a try. His first 6 balls were perfect, right down the middle, with a little spin that sent pins flying. As the pressure built, the cameras closed in. Eddie was nothing but a solid mass of concentration as he picked up the ball for his 7th try. Another strike. On the 8th ball, the master repeated his performance and racked up another strike. On the 9th frame, the ball came in a little low, and 9 of the pins went down at once, but the number 7 pin on the far left corner refused to fall. But at the last moment, one of the fallen pins crashed into it, and Eddie had another strike. The 10th ball was another perfect strike, and Eddie was only 2 balls away from a $10,000 payoff. And as the world watched, the self-confident bowler took his lead and released the ball. It hissed down the alley and into the pocket. Another perfect strike, and Eddie Lubanski had won $10,000 in cash. The next week, well, the show was off the air, and Eddie was on to bigger and better things, which I'll tell you about in just a moment. First, here's a pitch from today's Army. During World War II, many Europeans were surprised to see combat-hardened American troops taking time out to play a game of baseball. Well, it's much the same today. American soldiers from Texas to Thailand still take time out from their jobs to participate in athletics. Today's Army knows you have to be fit mentally and physically to meet the challenges of a modern world. Train hard, play hard. See your Army representative and join the people who've joined the Army. Now back to our story. It's about one of the finest bowlers America has ever seen, Eddie Lubanski. In 1958, Eddie put a local bowling show off the air by collecting their $10,000 cash prize for bowling a perfect game while on the air. In 1959, he topped it. It was June 22nd, and Eddie was entered in the mixed Scotch doubles tournament in Miami. He bowled another perfect game, 12 strikes in a row in tournament play. But then to show he was hot, Eddie kept on bowling. 13 strikes in a row, 14, then 15. Little by little, all of the other bowlers stopped their games and came over to watch Eddie. How long could he go without missing? Eddie was taking his time now, drying his hands before every throw, never taking his eyes off the pins. Now he had gotten 16 strikes, 17, 18. He asked someone to bring him a glass of water. They rushed out to get it for him, but he never touched it. Instead, he bowled 3 more strikes. Now he had 21 in a row. It was silent in the bowling alley as he let the ball go in the 22nd frame. You could hear the rumble echoing across the empty alleys as everyone watched it spin in for another strike, number 22. Eddie sucked in a huge gulp of air and let it out through his puffed cheeks. Without losing any rhythm, he let go number 23 and got another strike. Only one to go, and he would have thrown 2 perfect games back-to-back. Slowly, he sized up the distance, reared back, and let it fly. Every eye in the building was on the ball as it spun down the alley, and then another strike. Eddie Lubanski had done something that has never been duplicated, bowling 2 perfect games back-to-back in competition bowling. This is Don Drysdale, and if you take time to investigate, you'll find that the U.S. Army has a job that's right up your alley. So join the people who've joined the Army. Till next time, so long, everyone. This is Don Drysdale. There have been many heroic moments in the history of sports, but the most dramatic ones happen when a well-trained athlete extends his abilities beyond his natural limits. Today, you'll hear about one such person. This program is brought to you as a public service of this station on behalf of your local Army recruiter. He can explain the Army's training program that allows you to choose the career and training you desire. So see him soon. Now, today's story. It's about an athlete few people have ever heard of, an Argentine named Antonio Albertondo. In 1961, Albertondo was 42 years old. He was developing middle age spread. As a youngster, he had been a well-known Argentine swimmer. He had tried to make the Olympic team, but was not fast enough to qualify. Then, as he grew older, he became interested in long-distance swimming. Here was something he excelled in. And so, on September 21st, 1961, Albertondo stepped into the icy waters in Dover Harbor. He was about to swim to Calais, France, some 22 miles away. But when he finished swimming, he would have set a record that has never been attempted before or since. And I'll tell you about that in just a moment. First, here's some important information from today's Army. You know, it takes a lot of things working together to make a champion. Dedication, natural ability, intense training. Well, today's Army offers you the training you want, guaranteed before you enlist. Put this with your dedication and talent and come out a winner in the race of life. See your Army representative and join the people who've joined the Army. Now back to our story. It's about a middle-aged swimmer from Argentina, Antonio Albertondo. And in 1961, he entered the English Channel at Dover with the idea of swimming to Calais, France, 22 miles away. But he did a little more than just that. His body was covered with thick black grease to protect it against the cold. He wore a rubber swim cap and a pair of goggles to protect his eyes. It was early morning when he pushed off from shore. A small motorboat was nearby to help set the pace or to pull him out if necessary. Swimming with strength and self-confidence, Albertondo made a clean swim, arriving in Calais in 18 hours and 50 minutes. He walked ashore and drank a cup of hot tea. Smilingly, he said, "Well, now that wasn't so bad. Now let's try it in the other direction." And as his aides looked on in horror, he turned around, walked back into the dark waters, and started swimming for England. As he swam toward the west, he had little idea of what an ordeal lay ahead. Extreme weariness began to attack. Swimming in those waters is a tremendous effort. After he had been in the water over 24 hours, his arms began to feel like lead weights. Pulling them out of the water began to be a torturous task. The wind picked up, and instead of blowing at his back, the way it had in the first leg of the swim, now it was blowing in his face. Soon his cheeks began to swell up from the pounding exposure. The goggles began to cut painfully into his face. Finally, he began to hallucinate. Squinting his eyes, he thought he saw dark shadows in front of him. "What's that?" he cried to the boat. "Nothing," was the answer. He swam on. Now the dark shadows began to take form. "Sharks!" he yelled. "Antonio, there's nothing out there," his friends in the boat replied. Albertondo was exhausted. He still thought he saw sharks, but when none attacked, he accepted the fact that he was imagining them and swam on, although he was frightened. He continued to swim, although now his style was gone. He flopped in the water like a dying seal. It took him over 2 hours to cover 1 mile, but he was determined to make it, and he did. Over 24 hours after leaving France, he waded ashore at Dover once again and collapsed. He had made it, swimming the English Channel round trip in a total of 43 hours and 15 minutes. And believe me, that's something that has never been attempted again. This is Don Drysdale. Today's Army is always trying something new. New programs, new skills that you can learn. See your local Army representative and join the people who've joined the Army. Till next time, so long, everyone. This is Don Drysdale. Many athletes are natural-born stars, and they have the physical ability and natural aptitude to excel in sports. But there are others, too, people who drive themselves, who have to overcome handicaps of all kinds. Today, I'll tell you about a famous champion who was lucky to be alive. This program is brought to you as a public service of the station on behalf of your local Army recruiter. Today's Army takes the luck out of finding a successful career. They can train you in a career with a real future. Get the facts on Army skills soon. And now, today's story. It's about a young lady named Wilma Rudolf. She was born in Clarksville, Tennessee in 1934. And life wasn't exactly kind to her. She had 18 brothers and sisters, and there was never enough money to feed and clothe this large family from her parents' small income. Her father was a porter on the train, and her mother worked as a housekeeper. Children slept everywhere in her house, in the living room, in the kitchen, on the floor, and on furniture, wherever there was room. Then, when she was 4 years old, things really got tough for Wilma. She caught scarlet fever. In the days before penicillin, it was a terrible childhood killer. While she lay in bed at home in a poorly heated house, she also picked up a case of double pneumonia. It was a miracle that this scrawny little girl lived. But she did live, although she could not walk anymore. She was paralyzed on her left side. But her parents wouldn't let her quit. They made her get better. Her mother began taking her to Nashville to see a specialist. It was a 45-mile bus trip, but they did it every week for 2 solid years. The clinic gave her physical therapy, and slowly her paralyzed leg began to function again. With specially made shoes, she was finally able to limp around and finally to walk. When she was 8, she could even run. Her brothers taught her how to play basketball, and she was pretty good at it. And when she entered high school, she made the team. In her last 2 years of high school, this pretty little girl set the state record for girls basketball when she scored 803 points in 25 games. Wilma had overcome the crippling diseases of her childhood. But her biggest challenge lay ahead. And I'll tell you about that in just a moment. First, here's a challenge from today's Army. It takes more than one kind of person to make a winner. When I was pitching baseball, I knew there were a lot of people on and off the field backing me up. Well, it's the same in the combat arms of today's Army. Armor, infantry, artillery. Young, tough men working together, overcoming a challenge to accomplish the mission. Go with the first team, join the people who've joined the Army. Now back to our story. It's about a beautiful girl from Tennessee named Wilma Rudolf. When she was a little girl, she was paralyzed, and after learning to walk again, she became an outstanding basketball player in high school. Ed Temple, the track coach at Tennessee A&I, saw Wilma on the court and suggested to the high school coach that a girls' track team be formed. The high school took the advice, and Wilma began running. She never lost a race in high school competition. In fact, she was good enough to be invited to run in the 1956 Olympics. She didn't win any races in Australia at the Melbourne Olympics, except for a bronze medal as one of America's relay team. But it was enough to really get her excited and determined to do better. She came home to enroll at Tennessee A&I, where the coach, Ed Temple, encouraged her and taught her to condition herself and pace herself. Then the women's track coach for the 1960 Olympics was announced, and it was Ed Temple. Now Wilma had to work harder than ever because Temple drove her. But she ran better than ever, and off she went to the 1960 Olympics in Rome. Her first race was a 100-meter dash. When the gun sounded, the closest rival Wilma had, a Russian girl named Maria Inkina, jumped to the lead. She held it for 25 meters, then Wilma began to close in beautiful long strides. At the halfway mark, Wilma was ahead. Then she lengthened the lead and opened up. It was only a question of how much she'd win by, and when she did win, it was to set a new world's record, 11 minutes flat. Later, she won the 200-meter dash and got a third gold medal anchoring the 400-meter relay. In the history of the Olympics, it was the first time that any runner, male or female, had ever won 3 gold medals. And that's not bad for a poor little girl from Tennessee who was mighty lucky to be alive. This is Don Drysdale, and you'll be in luck the day you see your local Army recruiter and join the people who've joined the Army. So long, everyone. This is Don Drysdale. The history of the Olympics is full of great competition and great accomplishments. But there are also some pretty strange tales to be found in the Olympic record books. Today, I'll tell you of a couple of the strangest records ever set in the strangest Olympics ever staged. This program is brought to you as a public service of this station on behalf of your local Army representative. Today's Army has many jobs open right now. They're looking for young men and women interested in learning a job with a future, either in or out of the service. Find out about Army training soon. And now, today's story. The Olympics are the most respected games in the world. The honor of Olympic competition is something every athlete dreams of, and usually the Olympics are handled with dignity and decorum. But once in a while, something goes wrong. Well, that was the case in 1904. The games were supposed to be in Chicago, but instead they were moved to St. Louis as part of the promotion of the Louisiana Purchase Exposition. Can you believe it? The Olympics were run as a promotion. Now, I can understand mistakes being made, but this time we really blew it. The Olympic records show that only 496 men, no women, from only 10 countries competed. Now, that's so few people that it's amazing. But there was excitement and drama, and I'll tell you about a couple of impossible events that took place in just a moment. First, here's something very possible from today's Army. During World War II, many Europeans were surprised to see combat-hardened American troops taking time out to play a game of baseball. Well, it's much the same today. American soldiers from Texas to Thailand still take time out from their jobs to participate in athletics. Today's Army knows you have to be fit mentally and physically to meet the challenges of the modern world. Train hard, play hard. See your Army representative and join the people who've joined the Army. Now back to our story. It's about the wonderful, wacky Olympics of 1904. Probably the worst Olympic Games ever staged. First of all, they were run as a promotion for an exposition in St. Louis, so they never were billed up as anything important. Then, only a handful of athletes showed up, and when they did, amazing things happened. For example, the swimming events were staged in a man-made lake. The swimmers dove in from a raft in the middle. In the 50-yard dash, the Hungarian swimmer Zoltan Halmay tied with a German for first place. The Hungarian claimed that he had won. The angry Germans claimed that they had won. In the shouting match that followed, the judges couldn't make up their minds about exactly who had done what, and a fistfight developed. Finally, they decided to run the race again. Can you believe it? This time, the Hungarian won, and the Germans stormed out of the game. But the strangest event of all was the marathon. It's one of the toughest races in the Olympics, but it's not too hard when you cheat. And in 1904, that's exactly what happened. It was a blistering hot August day when the race was run. 30 runners lined up to race over roads that were covered with dust in the St. Louis countryside. 17 of them collapsed before they reached the halfway point. The heat battered them from above, the dust choked them from below. To make it worse, no one cared much about the race, and few spectators paid any attention. One of the runners was a long-distance runner named Fred Lors. Fred collapsed after running 9 miles. His lungs were full of dust, and he was really coughing from all the dust. He simply couldn't run any further. He turned and started walking back to the stadium. But he didn't have to walk far. A friendly Missouri farmer pulled up alongside in his truck. "Can I give you a ride, young feller?" he asked. "Sure," said Lors, and he jumped into the truck. 5 miles from the stadium, he thanked the farmer and got out of the truck. Then he ran the rest of the way into the stadium, where he was named the winner. Unfortunately, the farmer was in the audience and told the judges that Lors was the same man that he had given a ride to. Well, Lors was disqualified, naturally. Instead, the race was won by Thomas Hicks, who literally staggered into the stadium 10 minutes later. You see, Hicks kept going by using liberal quantities of brandy. And by the time he got to the finish line on that hot August day, he was swacked out of his mind. How's that for a winner? And this is Don Drysdale. The Army will help you make a winner by training you for a good job. So don't cheat yourself. Join the people who've joined the Army. Till next time, so long, everyone. This is Don Drysdale. The Olympic Games are the finest competition among athletes in the world, and part of the reason for the continuing success of the Olympics has been the ability of the steering committee to add new sports when they become popular and drop old ones that people aren't interested in any longer. Today, I'll tell you about a couple of races that were dropped, and for good reasons. This program is brought to you as a public service of this station in cooperation with your local Army representative. Today's Army will teach you a job with a challenge and a good future. Get the details from your nearby Army recruiter soon. Now today's story. There have been millions of interesting sports stories to originate at the Olympic Games. Great champions have been recognized and crowned there, and breathtaking competition is what people have come to expect. Today, we'll examine a couple of events that were just plain dumb. First, let's talk about swimming. For the last several generations, Americans have always dominated the swimming competition, but it wasn't always so. Australia, Hungary, and Germany were once the swim powers of the world. And Australia's first swimming champion was Freddie Lane, who won a gold medal in the 1900 Paris Olympics in the 200-meter freestyle. Today, we're not concerned with Lane's first medal, but his second one, because he won it in a race that was staged for the first time in Paris in 1900 and then was never run again. It was called the 200-meter obstacle race. The program called it hurdle swimming, and that's just what it was. Every 50 meters, a swimmer would encounter several barrels floating in the water on their sides. Both ends had been removed, and the idea was to crawl through the obstacle and resume swimming until you came to the next one. Speed in crawling through the water-filled barrels was what counted. Lane was only 5 feet tall and weighed 120 pounds, so he slipped through much more quickly than any of his competitors. And in a moment, I'll tell you about an Olympic race that was even sillier. First, let's get serious about today's Army. You know, it takes a lot of things working together to make a champion. Dedication, natural ability, intense training. Well, today's Army offers you the training you want, guaranteed before you enlist. Put this with your dedication and talent and come out a winner in the race of life. See your Army representative and join the people who've joined the Army. Now back to our story, the story of fun and frolic at the Olympic Games. Just about everything has happened at the Olympics that you could ever imagine. Bravery, failure, suspense, and high camp comedy. One of the funnier failures in the Olympic record books took place in the 1908 Games in London. The event was the 1,000-meter sprint for bicycles. The British had built a brand-new bike track, an oval 660 yards long. It was paved with bricks, and it was a beautiful sight to see, but it wasn't much fun to ride on. Obviously, the men who built it had never been on bicycles in their lives, because although the track looked great, the bumpy texture of the rough bricks threatened to tear a bike apart when it built up speed. Before the cyclists had completed one lap, 7 had experienced blowouts. They slowly walked their bicycles to the center of the arena to watch the rest of the race. Then there were more blowouts. Riders were falling all over the track, and within minutes, over 20 riders were down. Well, if this kept up, no one would be left in the race. As the almost continuous pop, pop, pop went on non-stop, the first riders down had a great idea. They'd change tires, then get back in the race. Of course, as soon as they started changing their flats, so did everyone else, and soon there was complete pandemonium on the track. There was only 5 or 6 men riding at any given moment. The rest of them were strewn all over the arena, changing tubes and inflating tires. As soon as the repairs were finished, they jumped back on their bikes and pedaled away, only to have another flat a few minutes later. And finally, after an hour of desperation, they finally gave up. The race was called off. No winner was announced. It was one of the funniest flubs that ever befell an Olympic competition. A rotten track that prevented everyone from finishing. And this is Don Drysdale, and you're sure to finish a winner if you join the people who've joined the Army. Until next time, so long, everyone. This is Don Drysdale. There are millions of interesting and unusual stories in the world of sports, and it's a good thing, too, because that's what this program is all about. Some are long enough to take a whole program to describe. Others are interesting tidbits that are too short to fill up a show, but too good to throw away. I call them sports shorts, and today I'm going to share a few with you. This program is a public service of this station on behalf of your local Army recruiter. Today's Army will teach you a lifetime trade that guarantees you of a sound future either in or out of the service. Find out about Army training soon. Now, today's excursion into the world of sports shorts. Our first true story is about a famous woman athlete from Missouri named Helen Stevens. She was known as the Missouri Tornado, and she may have been the fastest woman that the world has ever known. She was a tall lady, standing 6 feet high and weighing 155 pounds. She ran in over 100 national and international races and she never lost one single one. She reached her prime in 1936 when she was 23 years old. There, she set the world's record for the 100-meter sprint, 11 and a half seconds, a record that still stands. With her ability, she could have been the most famous woman athlete in the world. Instead, she's forgotten today because after setting the world's record, she decided, well, there was nothing left to prove, and she retired. Okay, now here's this story. The Australians have had many famous long-distance runners. Did you know they also held the world's record for skipping? Tom Morris, a great athlete, holds the mark. He skipped from Melbourne to Sydney 590 miles. And if you're a stickler for detail, he averaged 800 skips per mile, with each skip covering 6.5 feet. It took him 28 days to make the trip, which totaled 472,000 skips. Now, there's more to this story. Well, I decided to skip it so we could bring you this reminder from today's Army. It takes more than one person to make a winner, and when I was pitching baseball, I knew there were a lot of people on and off the field backing me up. Well, it's the same in the combat arms of today's Army. Armor, infantry, artillery. Tough young men working together, overcoming a challenge to accomplish the mission. Go with the first team and join the people who've joined the Army. Now back to today's rapid roundup of sports trivia. I call it Sports Short. Stories too short for one complete show, but too good to forget. The next one I want to share is about the craziest opening day that ever happened to baseball. And where else could it happen? Well, Brooklyn. It was 1912. The Dodgers were playing their arch rivals, the Giants. 20,000 fans were crammed into a tiny stadium that was built to handle no more than 15,000. The mayor was there to throw out the first ball. There were bands and souvenirs everywhere, but the game didn't go very well for the Dodgers, and by the sixth inning, they were being creamed 18-3. Well, the Brooklyn fans were outraged at the drubbing, and they began to riot. Fruit flew on the field. Fights broke out all over the stadium. Outfielders were attacked as they tried to catch fly balls. Finally, the umpires called the game on account of darkness. Well, since it was only 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that didn't make much sense to the crowd, and the fighting got worse. They attacked the mayor, the police, the ball players, and anyone else that happened to get in their way. The riot squad was finally called in, and 700 baseball fans were hauled off to jail, ending the wildest opening day in baseball history. And finally, here's one last little quickie that I thought you'd enjoy, and with all the talk of strikes by various teams these days, it's good to remember that it's nothing new to baseball. In 1918, an incredible thing happened. The Chicago Cubs were meeting the Boston Red Sox in the World Series. Some smart clubhouse lawyer began fiddling with the attendance figures and decided that there wasn't going to be any money to divide up among the players. So both teams decided not to come out on the field for the fifth game unless they were guaranteed more money. A committee of players met with the baseball commissioner and finally worked out a plan for more money before the fifth and final game was played. It's the first and only sit-down strike in World Series history. This is Don Drysdale, and today's Army is paying more money in salaries than ever before. And you get paid while you're training and learning a new skill. Jobs are open now, so join the people who've joined the Army. Till next time, so long, everyone. This is Don Drysdale. A professional athlete has to face many tough moments during his playing career, but the very hardest may be the day he takes the field as a young replacement for a beloved old pro. Today, I'll tell you about one such young man and how he met the challenge. This program is brought to you as a public service of the station on behalf of today's Army. In the Army, you can learn basic, useful skills that will last you a lifetime. See your local Army recruiter soon. And now, today's story. It's about a young farmhand named Frankie Brimsick. He was a promising young hockey goalie when he was brought into the National Hockey League in 1938 for the season opener. The regular goalie, Tiny Thomson, had been injured, and the Boston Bruins needed someone to fill in. Frankie had never been in an NHL game before, and he was petrified. And when he hit the ice, Frankie helped beat Toronto in the opener and then stayed with the Bruins for one more game. By then, the regular goalie was ready for action, and Brimsick was sent to Providence. Thomson, the Bruin goalie for 8 years, had won the Vezina Trophy as the league's outstanding player 4 times, including the preceding season. He was good, he was strong, and he was popular. Bostonians loved him. So you can imagine how furious they were when he was sold to Detroit for $15,000 after only playing in 5 games. Frankie Brimsick was recalled to replace the popular player. Newspaper and fan reaction was horrible. The Boston manager, Art Ross, was hanged in effigy. But Ross had a very good reason for selling off his popular star and bringing in the unknown. I'll tell you what that reason was in just a moment. First, here's a good reason to thank Army. During World War II, many Europeans were surprised to see combat-hardened American troops taking time out to play a game of baseball. Well, it's much the same today. American soldiers from Texas to Thailand still take time out for their jobs to participate in athletics. Today's Army knows you have to be fit mentally and physically to meet the challenges of a modern world. Train hard, play hard. See your Army representative and join the people who've joined the Army. Now back to our story. It's the true tale of a young, unknown hockey player who was called on to replace one of the most popular goalies of all time. The young man was Frankie Brimsick. The old pro was Tiny Thomson, who had been sold to the Detroit Red Wings. When the press heard about the sale, they mobbed the offices of the Boston Bruins. Everyone wanted to interview the manager, Art Ross. Art locked himself in the office and called Brimsick in. He figured he'd give a press conference and introduce his new protege to the press. Well, Frankie didn't help much. He got on a train to Providence and rode to Boston. And when he arrived there, he passed a movie theater showing the latest Gene Autry movie. So, instead of heading for the hockey arena, he went to see the show while Art Ross and the reporters waited. When he finally arrived 2.5 hours late, he helped even less. Frankie was very nervous unless he had a hockey stick in his hand. So, most of his answers were the one-syllable kind. As you might guess, the press blasted him the next day. If he didn't deliver, well, he'd be run out of town. What nobody knew was that Art Ross, the manager, had tested Frankie on the ice. Ross had fired 25 shots directly at him from 10 feet away. Not one shot scored. Later, Ross had tested the old goalie the same way. 6 shots scored. And that was why the change had been made. When he skated on the ice for his first game at home, the stands grew silent. Instead of applause or cheers, no one in the arena made a sound when Brimsick was introduced. With an introduction like that, well, most people would have folded. Instead, Frigid Frankie, as he was known, shut out his opponents for 3 games in a row. He set an NHL record of 232 minutes of continuous goaltending without being scored on. That year, he won the Vezina Cup, and the Bruins won their first Stanley Cup in 10 seasons. His public relations never needed help again, but then they never do if you're good. This is Don Drysdale, and if you think you're good, join the people who've joined the Army. Till next time, so long, everyone.